Frankly, much of what I heard in your testimony I agree with, and frankly, I rarely say those words to a member of the administration. Having said that, I'm far more impressed by actions than words, but I'm hopeful that what I heard in your testimony, see in your testimony, that there will certainly be follow-through. I have a great concern about the actuarial soundness of the MMIF. The first question I have, I guess, is maybe help me with a little bit of historical context. I wasn't able to complete the study on my own, but just how often in the history of the fund have the FHA secondary reserves been at this level? We know they're below the 2% statutory level, but how often has the reserve fund dipped to, I believe it is 0.53%?
Well, the 2% requirement was actually created in the wake of the mid-'80s
right, I understand
collapse
that
we had. And at that point when it was created, in fact, the reserve level was far below the 2% minimum. It took a number of years of growing the capital after it was established to get it above 2%. So it has been below the 2%. This is the first time that it has dropped below the 2%. Since it went above that first time, but it has been below the 2%.
So I'm sorry, since the 80s after it's...
I don't have the exact date in front of me. I don't remember whether, I believe it was the early 90s where it actually went above.
Regardless, when one looks at the entire history of the fund, yes?
It was 1995 where the 2% was achieved. Between 1990 and 95, it was below the 2%.
In your testimony, Mr. Secretary, you say that, quote, as such, the actuary concluded that the FHA's reserves will remain positive under all but highly severe economic scenarios. I know you believe that. I hope that to be true. You may have had come to your attention an editorial in the Wall Street Journal yesterday where now OMB Director Dr. Peter Orszag, back in 2002, wrote a paper, and I quote from it, quote, on the basis of historical experience, the risk to the government from a potential default on GSE debt is effectively zero, unquote. In that same paper, now OMB Director Orszag, apparently they tested Fannie and Freddie, quote, against the financial and economic conditions of the Great Depression, unquote. I just say that, Mr. Secretary, again, that some of us are skeptical, particularly when we look at what has happened to the unfunded liabilities of Social Security that weren't supposed to need taxpayer infusions, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, the National Flood Insurance Program, and now we know what the status of the FDIC fund is. It could be a matter of time before Chairman Bear is knocking on the Treasury's door for a line of credit there. So I'm concerned ultimately, notwithstanding your fairly sanguine posture, that we still have the fund in harm's way. And that concerns me greatly on a number of different fronts. Number one, I believe everything that we do ought to be viewed through the prism of what does it do for jobs. I think the number one job of this Congress ought to be jobs. And unfortunately, since this administration has come into power, we've had an additional 3.5 million of our fellow countrymen lose their jobs. The only thing I see that the stimulus has brought us is the highest deficit in the nation's history, the first $1 trillion deficit, and rising unemployment. I believe, frankly, that a lot of that is tied to the debt overhang and the actuarial soundness of the MMIF, frankly, could be one more shoe to drop. And I don't know, at least when I talk to people in the 5th Congressional District of Texas, when they're looking at the possible monetizing of the debt, if they're looking at huge tax increases, when they're looking at further bailouts by this administration, nobody wants to hire anybody. Nobody wants to launch a new enterprise. And so I'm just hopeful, and I see my time is running out, that what you said in your testimony you will do to ensure that the insurance fund does not need a taxpayer bailout, I hope you follow through And particularly, I hope that you pay very careful attention to legislation by the gentleman who's sitting to the left of me, the gentleman from New Jersey, who has legislation to increase the required down payment for these FHA loans. And in the conversation you were having with the other gentleman from Texas, certainly statistically and anecdotally, the correlation between, as you put it in your own testimony, skin in the game in default rates cannot be denied. And I hope that you will pay very serious attention to the gentleman's legislation. I see I'm out of time.